I'll just start by introducing myself and then do some more introductions of the organization as a whole. So my name is Emilio Tavares. I am the Policy Research and Advocacy Director for Hunger Free America. So I manage our legislative advocacy, our community organizing, and our research initiatives. My background is also in social work, so I have many years of experience doing casework with low-income individuals, helping them access nutrition assistance programs and other forms of support in New York City. So before I get into the presentation we'll be doing today about lived experience of hunger and poverty, I want to first do a land acknowledgement to give thanks for the place where I'm speaking to you all from. I'd like to acknowledge the Lenape, Canarsie, Rockaway, and Wapingur Indigenous peoples, and we delivered land acknowledgement to acknowledge the historical legacy of colonialism by honoring and paying respect to the land which was taken by conquest. And we do it to raise greater public consciousness of native sovereignty and cultural rights as small steps toward equitable relationship and reparation. We encourage you all to learn about the lands on which you sit, and we'll provide a link in the chat for you to do so. And so if you're not familiar with Hunger Free America, we are a nonpartisan national nonprofit building the movement to enact policies and programs needed to end domestic hunger and to ensure that all Americans have sufficient access to nutritious food. So we do this both through our direct service and our advocacy work. And I see our esteemed leader and CEO, Joel Berg, joined us for this session to kick off our MLK Day of Service. So I'll actually pass it up to him if he wants to say a couple words. No, you're good, okay.
I have nothing to say except I'll leave it in Barbie and Emilio's capable hands, except engaging people with lived experience is really important to us. No social movement in the history of the world has been won by one people on behalf of another, and we can't defeat hunger unless we have low-income people in the leadership. So I'll just hand it off and welcome. And I have to pop off. I'm going to a bunch of these this morning, but thank you all for coming.
Yeah, thank you, Joel. And there's no denying that our work with Hunger Free America, representing the estimated 50 million people affected with food insecurity throughout this crisis, both the pandemic and the hunger crisis that we're experiencing, continues to make our work vital. And today we're going to focus on one aspect of our work. We have a lot of activities both in the direct service and advocacy space. And today we're focusing on sort of our philosophies around community organizing. Before I get into the presentation, I'd first like to go over some group norms. So for us, a safe space is a brave space. So we are called to create a brave space where we accept the likelihood that we will be uncomfortable when investigating issues of race, privilege, and oppression, and our roles within them. So we work to recognize our privilege. You know, I have privilege in ways, and I have oppression in other ways. So I think being aware of both is important. And so use this space to recognize and investigate that privilege, take risks. So lean into discomfort if you have questions, or if you feel uncomfortable and feel like you need to make a comment or ask a question, we encourage you to engage us in the chat, and so we can grow together. And we aim to actively listen. You know, we don't know what we don't know. We're all on this journey together. So we appreciate your insight and hope that you will be open to our insight. And if there's any additional norms anybody in the space would like to add, feel free to make that recommendation in the chat and we welcome that as well. And so to get into the presentation, I'd like to introduce my co-host, Barbie Izquierdo, Community Empowerment Manager for Hunger Free America, but I'll let her say a few words about herself as well.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to be here. As Emilio said, my name is Barbie Izquierdo, and I'm the Community Empowerment Manager here at HFA. I have a background in advocacy and anti-hunger work for the past 13 years. I've worked for various anti-hunger organizations, as well as using my personal story and experience to uplift the many and necessary changes that need to be made in order to make sure that our communities aren't facing hunger. So thank you for being with us.
And yeah, so Barbie and I work very closely together on both our community organizing and advocacy initiatives. And so this is sort of the agenda for today. As I said at the beginning, if you want to introduce yourself in the chat, please let us know, your name, what pronouns you like to use, and what part of the country you're calling from, whether you're New York City or another part of the country. We are a national organization, so we always love to hear, even though we're based in New York City, we love to hear from other parts of the country. Because like I said, we can always be better and improve what we're doing. We're going to be spending a lot of time talking about our Food Action Board program, which is our community organizing program. We have a big active community in New York City and are working very hard to establish consistent, engaged communities in other parts of the country. Some of those areas include Florida, Pennsylvania, Texas, Arizona, that we're currently working in, but we're always looking for new partners in this work. We'll talk about sort of our experience so far with hiring people with lived experience. We don't want to just organize people. Ultimately, I think we're all trying to make a living, and what better way than by creating this movement. I'm very fortunate in this job. I'm very passionate, and makes it easier to wake up in the morning and get to work. Like I said at the beginning, we welcome your questions at any point, so don't feel the need to wait. If you feel a question, just speak up and we'll take it as they come. Oh, what did I do? Yeah, sorry. And then we'll have our contact information at the end. Like I said, we welcome new partners and collaborations. And with that, I'll pass it on to Barbie to talk a little bit about what we mean when we say lived experience or lived expertise.
Thank you, Emilio. So lived experience was a term that was introduced to me because personally, all I knew was my circumstances and my experiences. So I didn't know that this was like a thing that can help society. So when I think about my lived experience, I think about the core of what drove my passion to do this work. And unfortunately, it was a bunch of negative experiences that include trauma and trying to navigate through systems and dealing with being denied or rejected or not receiving the help that I needed at times. It also meant systemic barriers for me. All of these things I knew something was wrong, and I knew that that the help was needed, not just for myself, but for my community. And I didn't quite know what to do with that until I learned about advocacy. And in my experience, my advocacy led to the discovery of expertise in these experiences. And what I mean by that is the things that I've learned through those unfortunate circumstances. So, for example, I learned data management. I learned data management through having to provide paperwork for the county assistance office and learning what happens when they lose the paperwork, and learning how to advocate for yourself when you have a receipt saying that you turned your paperwork in, but they don't have it. I learned how to keep track of my money, my income, the things that that I needed to prove to them in order to become eligible or to prove that I was eligible. There's things that I can't explain, such as the survival skills that I learned throughout this process, the resilience that was gained throughout constantly being told no and just learning to not give up and to use my story to make these changes or to try to make these changes through the example of my life. Empathy is very, very, very important to me. I went from being the person who was in need of the services, the one who stood in line in food banks and had to provide my Social Security card just to get assistance, and who couldn't come back if it was within 30 days of the last time that I received help, to being a food stamp hotline counselor for the Coalition Against Hunger. So I was then the person who was being called when people wanted to apply for food stamps. I was telling them how much they were eligible for, doing the applications with them over the phone. If they lost their benefits, I was doing case management to try to get their benefits back. And I did all of this from a place of knowing what it felt like to be the other person on the side of the phone. So I made sure to treat everyone with dignity and respect and relatability to let them know that I was in the same boat as they are. And I know the importance of when you need help and you're trying to find all the resources that you can and you're exhausting all of the avenues, and you just have this hope that you'll get the help that you need. And I think that always coming back to the center and remembering that, this is bigger than just my personal experience is what helps drive my passion to do this work and to do it correctly and equitably. And then the job readiness, I learned how to write a resume, how to write a cover letter. And one of the things that's unique to my experience is that I took a leap, I took a chance in my cover letters in writing about my lived experience. So instead of hiding it and coming from a place of shame because of my experiences, I welcomed it. From the moment before someone met me, they knew what I experienced, how I handled it, and what I was able to gain through those experiences that could be beneficial to their organization. But Emilio, I'll pass it on to you to see if there's anything you would like to add.
No, and I think, one of the reasons we're lucky to have Barbie working with us is because she has been so effective at advocating for herself, advocating for others in her community. And so now we are trying to build a program that's robust enough to really build that pipeline in throughout the country. It's easy in New York because we're here in New York, but there are people fighting hunger and experiencing hunger all throughout the country. So as skilled as we are, we're not really all that special. There's a lot of other people that we want to hear from. There are all the people experiencing hunger are way more expert on these issues than we are at this point. And so we always come at this work from that place of humility. And so I wanted to give, in honor of Martin Luther King and his legacy, I wanted to add a little bit of our inspiration for the Food Action Board. As Joel said, no social movement in history has been won entirely by one people on behalf of another. And so we use Dr. King's words around, this quote that I found today, we are called to be people of conviction, not conformity, of moral nobility, not social respectability, because it is very nerve-wracking to speak truth to power, right? While we want to say all this federal support that we're getting these days is great, at the same time, that doesn't stop us from asking for more. We're not going to be done until there is no hunger, period, right? It's not just about mitigating it or alleviating it. Like, we at Hunger Free America really believe that we need a systemic solution so that nobody goes hungry in the US. Obviously, I would love to express that mission, but we're doing our part. And so some of the examples that we draw inspiration from are also the civil rights movement. Women and Black people both work together to fight for their right to vote, right? If it was just white people fighting for that, we might still be waiting, right? They might not have the franchise yet. Same with marriage equity. So the LGBT community came together to fight to make sure that they could protect their families and that they could see each other in the hospital or plan to, a life together and be recognized for it. And so similarly, any serious attempt to make that dream a reality of ending hunger and coming up with a system that really works for the long term is going to need low-income people at the forefront. So I myself am an immigrant. I have experience of being in a low-income family growing up, thanks to the education system here in New York. Particularly the education system, I was able to go to college and not accrue a lot of debt. So we know there's a lot of issues with these systems, but thankfully there was enough for me to work with and get ahead. And so we want to create these sorts of policies everywhere. So I wanted to give sort of the broad strokes of how the program works and what it's accomplished. And then I'll give some examples more specific. So like I said, this program is really meant to build that movement to end hunger, right? It's not just about, sitting around talking about our challenges, but it's really about working together to strategize how to change things. Every change takes time, but it's absolutely possible. A lot of what motivated me to be an advocate is so many people telling me, oh, that's not possible. We can't do that. That's just the way it is. And I don't accept that. I think, things are the way we allow them to be. So everybody has a role to play. So this is our way of helping people identify that. You know, our members are leaders in different ways. So some of them are really good at public speaking. So we'll have them do testimony, right? We'll write their words for them, or if it's in person, we'll prepare them to, you know, gather their thoughts. You know, like I said, it's nerve-wracking. So we want to support them as much as we can. Also speaking to the media, particularly around Thanksgiving. You know, that's the food holiday. So everybody's sort of looking for that feel-good picture, feel-good moment of like giving out cans of food. And so we take that opportunity more to highlight the federal aid, to highlight the need that still exists, and solutions that that our community is lifting up, that our community wants to see. And then not only that, you know, once members are with us a long time, you know, we have a lot of members who've been with us over a year. I want to give a shout out to Filomena Acevedo, who is our Director of Community Organizing and has very loyal community members that have been with her sometimes over decades. So she does a great job engaging community, promoting SNAP and WIC, and hosting a number of workshops on a variety of things that the community asks for. And so over time, a lot of those long-term members become what we call Food Action Board ambassadors. Not only are they looking to get services, but many of them are already leaders in their own right, community board members, you know, PTA members, you know, leaders in their schools. Similar to Barbie, they're the people that other people are like asking for help. Hey, you did this thing with your kids. Can you tell me what that looked like? How do I get that too? You know, we try to meet people where they're at, right? Like if you're looking for childcare, I'm not going to talk to you about, you know, food assistance. Like I'm going to try to address the childcare issue that you're having, and then over time build in more and more policies. So at this point, we have a really strong, you know, we have a community of about 300 members throughout the 5 boroughs, predominantly in the Bronx, predominantly immigrant communities that are Spanish speaking. Both Barbie and I speak Spanish as well. And then our other departments in benefits access has access to a lot of other languages like Chinese, Russian, and we're working to continue to expand on that. You know, Arabic and other languages are still very much needed, so we're never done. And then out of those 300, we have like 20 to 50 long-term members that we call our ambassadors, and they volunteer a lot of their time with us. You know, we give them swag like Barbie and I are sporting. You can see here it says Hunger Free NYC. We're doing combinations, SNAP and WIC outreach in combination with vaccine outreach because low-income people have higher rates of health issues. So they're more immunocompromised, right? Like they're more likely to get sick. So that's how we tackle this, right? Like if we get people more food, more nutritious food, they'll be in better health to be better able to combat the virus. So ending hunger lifts us all, and ending ending the virus also lifts us all. We really need to get a handle on both of those issues. And in terms of success, you know, again, we've seen a massive boost in federal aid over the last year. Some of these specific examples I'm just going to mention because there's a lot. But just within the last year, the Thrifty Food Plan was changed. You may have heard of it before. If you haven't, that's okay. But it's basically the formula that determines SNAP benefit amounts. Of course, SNAP is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, what used to be called food stamps. And so because of this change, every household enrolled will see about a 20% increase in their benefits or more, depending on their specific case. Another example would be the pandemic EBT program that was established during the pandemic to basically give families the value of school meals that their children missed out on because of the pandemic, right? If they're doing virtual school, there are school meals that they would have gotten out there that the parents need to cover. And we never saw the education system as a way to feed children before. But if kids are too hungry to learn, they won't be able to focus, they'll do poorly. There's also behavioral issues that are shown to go down simply by keeping them fed. So it also prevents them from eating junk food. So they're, you know, school meals have been shown to be the most nutritious meals that the government is able to provide these days. So There's a lot of reasons why we appreciate that. And then the last program I'll mention, just again within the last year, were the child tax credits that many households got. Households with children would have received payments on a monthly basis for 2021. And unfortunately, it lapsed with the new year. And so we continue to fight to make these programs permanent because they've shown that they were needed before the pandemic, and they continue to address the food insecurity that is consistent. So I just wanted to, again, give sort of like the broad strokes of how this program works and some specific wins that we've been able to get. To speak specifically on how we run the program, these are some of the stages I conceptualize it in. From beginning, let's say I meet someone at a community event, a job fair, a public health fair, or at a park, at a speech, wherever the situation might be. That's sort of the community outreach piece. Engaging people with services. That's usually where I've started. Like, have you heard of SNAP? If you haven't, let me tell you about it. You might be eligible. Oh, you're not eligible for SNAP. Well, do you have childcare? Do you have WIC? Is there a housing subsidy that you might benefit from? For example, in New York City, there's the City FEPS program, which is getting an increased value. So wherever people want to start, that's sort of where I go into it, because over time, it becomes, well, like, oh, you are using those programs. What do you think of it? What would you like to see? Like, what are the good parts? What are the downsides, right? Like, how would you make it better? So that's the engagement piece, is sort of like not just giving them information, but also asking them what they think. After a while, then it becomes a professional development. And this can be seen, like, if you think about it in the course of a year, right? You meet someone, you get to know them, maybe like 2-3 months. Then over time, I want to offer more trainings. Like I said, we host a lot of workshops on the vaccine, on public benefits and stuff. Now I'm Barbie and I will be increasing the number of workshops we do on advocacy and the legislative process. So this is the professional development piece that we get to. And when I say everybody has a purpose, I mean it, right? So not everybody is a good public speaker, right? Not everybody's good with visuals. Like, I'm terrible at presentations, so I rely on Barbie to put these types of visuals together. I'm more of a words person, right? So rather than sort of like hide from that and sort of say, no, I could do it all, I try to lean into people's strengths. Like, if I'm a word person, give me all the word stuff. You need me to type something, I could do that in a day, So I want to identify those strengths in community members, right? As Barbie said, if they have lived experience of hunger and poverty, they have developed strengths to get out of their situation, right? Like, they're still in it, they're still fighting, they still have that resiliency. So we want to identify those strengths and encourage it, right? Like, oh, you never thought about yourself as a words person? Well, I see it. Maybe you should think about that, right? Or like, if people are telling you that you're a public speaker, maybe you should just take the compliment and lean into that, right? So I think, so again, if you do that professional development, let's say, I would say like 6 months of training to do it well. That's sort of like the new stuff I want to do. Then we can take it into strategic planning, right? Like, oh, where are my writers? Where are my organizers? Where are my speakers, right? Like, being able to have that movement and that like organized body of people ready to throw down is important. And then being able to map, the strategy comes in and being able to map out, okay, we have 20 people, 5 of you live in this district, 15 of you live in this other district. So the elected officials that represent you all are these folks. These are the people we need to focus on because they need to listen to you. They're supposed to work for you. Public servants work for us. So my strategy is just giving them that right lever to pull. I think oftentimes in advocacy, people just don't know who to speak to, right? Like, we get stuck in sort of complaining, but you need to complain to the right person, like the person that actually has the power to change the thing that you're complaining about. If you want change, right? So we're all about change and action. It's not just about sharing our thoughts and feelings, but leading to concrete change. So the advocacy and lobbying is some of those wins that I mentioned, right? Like getting an increase in SNAP. That's because our community members told us SNAP is good, but it's too low, right? We need more money in these programs. Now there's like calls for childcare, healthcare. living wage jobs. You know, we don't think that SNAP and WIC and other programs are the solution, right? Like, we just need to pay people more. And over time, we'll see hunger end. So I think we're starting with what exists and calling for improvements and new programs that may not yet exist. And so that's sort of the big trajectory of the Food Action Board from you just met us at a community, you know, pantry, and then a year later, you're in the trenches, right? Like giving testimony, talking to elected officials, talking to the media. That's sort of the pipeline we want to see more of. And all of you can help us, you know, please donate to Hunger Free America so that we can continue this work. We can hire more folks. I should have also mentioned we hired a lot of our Food Action Board members to do some of the vaccine outreach. So membership to our program is not just about getting social services, but we go to them first when there are hiring opportunities. You know, we've trained these people, we know these people, they've shown their commitment to our mission. So what we want to give back, we want to give them first dibs on anything that they feel up to, and also, you know, hear their feedback when we could do better. You know, we always go to them in terms of like, this is what we're thinking in terms of our plan. What do you think of it? You know, where would you adjust it? It's not, we try to make it as much as possible a two-way street. And so to talk more about sort of both sides of, you know, hiring people with lived experience, you know, there's a lot of interest recently, which we love to see, of hiring people who have experience using food pantries and soup kitchens and other programs. But there's a lot of confusion about the best way to move forward, confusion and fear about the best way to move forward, confusion about what to do, and then fear about doing the wrong thing. So Barbie and I have taken it upon ourselves to sort of share best practices from what's working for us. You know, we're still learning as we go. We've been working together over a year now. So I will give you highlights from both perspectives, both from, you know, Barbie's perspective being managed by me, and then my experience having supervised her for over a year. So I'll pass it on to Barbie.
Thank you, Emilio. So my experience working for HFA is something that has been completely life-changing, and I feel has solidified me in the part of moving forward with my life. And I think that in working here, I had to take a moment and really reflect on, well, what makes this job different than the ones that I've already had? And I think that one of the first things that's very, very important to me that I received from not only the organization, but specifically from Emilio, from Joel, is that I feel that they're trauma informed. So when we are in a meeting and we are talking about something that can be triggering, re-triggering, or re-traumatizing for me, they know how to handle that. They can still take the value of my words outside of the feelings that I have tied to what we're talking about. And they treat me with respect. They don't treat me differently because I'm maybe more emotionally tied to these conversations and these situations. So it's very important as an employer to have someone that, when you have someone who has lived experience working for you, someone that they can turn to comfortably, without feeling judged, without feeling the looming, I don't want to say glow, but the loomingness of imposter syndrome and all of that stuff. So along with being trauma informed and having that clouded judgment of imposter syndrome, you need to have a clear vision. And Emilio always has a clear vision. Even if I think I know something and I have a great approach, he can still give me his input from his experiences and his perspective that can make me look at things a little differently, that aren't as biased and tied to my experiences. I always know what it is that I need to do. I have clear instructions. He communicates so well, so I know that if ever there's any questions that I may have, or even if I have some self-doubt and I think that I may not, have the skill to execute something, he's very clear in letting me see, you have this skill. This is how you gained it. This is how you used it. And it's very encouraging for me. HFA has absolutely given me a safe space to not only share my ideas, but to share those traumatic experiences without feeling tokenized. I know that I can talk about something really, really personal, whether it's an experience with food insecurity that I had, an experience that maybe that my children had. And I know that although it's difficult for me in the moment to share, I know that while I'm sharing that Emilio and Joel are taking the gems out of what I'm saying and being able to reflect that to the audience in a way that maybe I can't articulate because I'm so caught up in the moment. And this could be about any topic. So it's not just about food insecurity. We can be talking about poverty in itself. We can be talking about searching for people to participate in our Food Action Board program. And my input just always feels like it's valued, even if it may be different than everyone else's in the room. And it's always, always, always respected. And that's not something that you can find at every employer. So I really, really do appreciate that. And lastly, I would say that again, not just Emilio, but the organization as a whole gives us the opportunity to brainstorm together. Emilio talked about having the Food Action Board members be the first ones to have opportunities to work for Hunger Free America. And, you know, it's not just that HFA offers them the opportunity to work, but they take their suggestions, their input under consideration, and always makes us feel like we're a part of the process, that they bring us in, that the organization or you know, my supervisor, they bring us in very, very, very early on, before any mistakes are made, before any decisions are made for our community. They make sure that the community voice is in there some way, somehow. And it's very validating. It's very different than growing up in poverty and just being always told to either stay quiet or you don't know what's best for you. So yeah, it's been very, very, very life-changing. It's been such a positive experience, even in the moments that it's been hard. And I think that's just because the organization and the employees see me as a person. They offer me the support that I need to get through my day-to-day experiences, even when something happens all of a sudden that maybe I wasn't prepared for. I'm not made to feel like I'm being penalized or judged by not only the things that I say, but some of the things that I've had to go through. And having these sort of talks or these sort of moments in the workplace that can not only bring us closer, but make the work better, because you can see that there's trust between everyone, has definitely made this one of the best experiences of my life, and definitely affirmed me more in my role as a career woman or as an employee, and not just feeling like I'm a mother with lived experience who's in the room because of my lived experience. And I'll pass it on to Amelia.
And I think it's also partly because I have lived experience myself that it's easier for me to work with you, right? So we can bond over some of the ways we've overcome similar issues, but at the same time, to talk about my privilege, like I'm not a woman and I don't have children. So there's a lot of things that can come up that I'm not going to hold against anybody, right? Because it's not their fault if something happens that they have to deal with. Like life doesn't happen in a box. So I put in the chat, you know, and I think that's where the trauma-informed care comes in, to go back to what Barbie was saying. I put in the chat a piece that can start to give you all a sense of what that means. But I think this is a pretty concise definition to start with. Trauma-informed care understands and considers the pervasive nature of trauma and promotes environments of healing and recovery rather than practices and services that may inadvertently re-traumatize someone. And so to put it another way, you know, in social work, there's this concept of the strengths-based perspective. And I think is that we as a culture are so used to sort of going to the negative. Like it's easy to say, okay, this new thing happened, here's all the stuff that's wrong with it. Or I wish it could have been like this, or I wish I could have been like that. So over time, I've just sort of trained myself where now I just do it unconsciously. My first thought is always like, what's good about it? Like, what's good about that, right? Like, okay, you're a traumatized person, as callous as it might feel, but like, what's good about that, right? Like, what did you come out of that with? How did you make it through that situation? That's sort of like how we flip the narrative on the trauma rather than like continuing to see people as victims. I think the opposite of that is seeing them as survivors. So what skills did they develop to survive the trauma that they went through? Recognizing that verbally is key. And so I think that's part of what like a good trauma-informed care style is being that sort of encouragement of, yeah, no, you can do it. You are in this position for a reason. We hired you for a reason. We, you know, I think particularly women, but also people that have been traumatized tend to minimize their accomplishments and abilities. So I think there's like a need to verbally affirm someone like, oh, you're good at public speaking, or you're good at presentations, or you're good at writing, like whatever the person is good at, they may not be used to hearing that, right? Like they may not be used to hearing a compliment. Like I often, as a caseworker, experience many people just sort of like minimize and say, oh, well, like I just did that. Like I didn't play that big a role. And I'm like, you were a manager in whatever, a shoe store, right? Managing people is hard, right? Like how did you deal with all these schedules and personal issues and things like that? Like recognizing that, giving them credit, that might be the first time anybody has given them credit when they're in their most vulnerable space. Hearing that can sort of start to change their self-perception, right? I think a lot of it is self-confidence, right? Like starting to build that self-confidence within people is key. And then over time, you can trust them. I think another way to build self-confidence in people is by delegating without micromanaging. Like if someone gives you an idea, then I'm sort of flip it back on them. And I'm like, okay, great. How can we start that, right? Like, how can you take action? How can I support you in following through with that idea? And then letting them take initiative. You know, my style is very much like, okay, we agreed on the thing. Can we talk about it again, you know, in 2 weeks? And I'll set a date for that. And I'm always very open in saying, I just want to see the progress. It's not about a finished product. I think sometimes as a writer, I want to write things perfectly in the first draft, and that's unrealistic. So being able to say, you know, I just want to see a draft by this date. Does that sound good? Do you need anything from me? Do you need like initial language? Do you need an outline? Like, what do you need so that I can leave this in your hands, right? I think that's sort of been my approach. And so for this presentation, for example, like Barbie took the first cut, then I went in, changed some of the language, added some images, and that's sort of the collaborative nature of our relationship. And then I think, you know, empathy and compassion go a long way. I try to put myself in people's shoes. Like if I had a kid, they would be my first priority. Like, you know, I'm going to get fired. That's okay. If I'm taking care of my kid, like that's important. And so I try to like put myself in their shoes when issues outside of work happen. You know, we all know that gun violence is a major issue in the US. And so, you know, if someone were to tell me that there's a bomb threat or a shootout near their neighborhood, you know, I've been in meetings where I'm like hearing police sirens in the background, right? Or that's me, right? Like in my neighborhood, I'm hearing police sirens in the background. So it's important to look at people as full people. They're not just a worker, right? So if they're a mother, if they're, you know, they have mental illness, if they disclose that to you, it's not about punishing them for it, but or ignoring it. It's about taking it into account, right? Like, oh, I know that you have these things about you, and so what I can do on my end is put things in this way. I'll give another example. You know, people with autism, there's high function, it's a spectrum, right? So there's high functioning where they may not need a lot of assistance. And then there's low functioning where they may need a lot of, you know, social supports and social programs. With the high functioning people, what I found is you still need to give very clear directions. Like you need to, you know, and so that's something I know, like, oh, thank you for telling me that you have autism, because now I have a better way of engaging with you, instead of saying, oh, well, why is this person just not understanding my style? Like it's up to them to like get it together. So those are sort of like the two approaches one could take. So I'm always more on the like, oh, thank you for telling me. Now I can adjust my plans based on that information. And then finally, I would say, the fourth thing that I always keep in mind is expectations, trying to give clear expectations of what the position is, what I want the person to accomplish on any given time frame, whether it's a week or 2 weeks or a month. This time, I've been with Hunger Free America for about 3 years. So now, every year I try to get a better handle on sort of like what's coming and sort of see the big picture for the year. So now being able to say like, okay, for this year, Barbie, here's what I want us to work on, and then breaking it down into very measurable things. Doing this presentation as part of it, we intend to do this presentation many more times and continuously improve it as we go, right? There may be situations where we want to focus on one area more than another, tailor it more based on the audience or the setting or the circumstance. And so we'll continue to improve, but just always being clear of what I want. Like if I want the presentation, I want it to be this long. I want it to be how long do I want it to be? By when do I want it to be done? What parts do I want you to do versus what I want you to do? So being very clear about this is the project, this is what needs to get done, and then this is who's responsible for which part. And I think another thing I would say to managers specifically is to be a collaborator, to take action yourself. Because I've met a lot of managers to sort of delegate and then don't really like contribute. Whereas I try to work with my staff, right? Like I'll do the writing part, can you do the visuals, right? Or like you do the writing part, I'll organize it. Like whatever the project is, there's a part I play and there's a part they play, and we're both accountable to each other. So to summarize, because I know that was a lot, I think encouragement, trust, empathy, and expectations are sort of like the four things that I think about in terms of managing someone with lived experience. And I hope some of that insight is helpful in your own experiences managing staff of any kind.
Emilio, if I can add really quickly, I just want to give you some kudos in reference to the portion that you were talking about, trainings and clear expectations. There's also the moments where, let's say that I might not be, okay, perfect example. I've been managing volunteers for the first time ever. I've had people like work under me in like little projects that I've had to manage as far as projects, but never really people. But Emilio thought that I would be great at this. He thought that, that it's something that not only that I would be good at, but something that would help my career, even if I'm not at HFA, something that I can take on with me to add on to those skills that I've already developed through my lived experience. So that encouragement with also the expectations, he offers trainings that I may not have thought of, that maybe he thinks will be beneficial to help me grow, that I may be intimidated by, or just never thought that I would understand it, or that, it would do me well. There's those moments where I'm like, I don't know, but I'm going to go because he told me to go. And then I go and I'm like super excited, rejuvenated, motivated. I now have this new skill and I'm, excited to learn more, or how to practice and implement those things. So it's not just the encouragement that I receive as far as like, you're doing a good job, but the encouragement of, yes, you're doing a good job, but this is how I think we can improve. What do you think about it? How do you feel about it? And even if you're not confident, you're going to do it anyway, because I believe in you.
It's more, my approach is more like, how much time do you need to get there, right? It's not like you can't do it. You can't do it. Like people say that, again, self-limiting, right? Like low-income people do this all the time. Like, I can't do it because I don't have the education or the experience. And I'm like, you can do it, but it's more about how much time it's going to take for you to get there, or like, what is it that I can do to get you there? So it's that like supportive relationship. So stop making me tear up, because I don't want to cry this early in the morning. So humor is important in relationship building as well. So I encourage some of it to be sprinkled into the management. And Joel is actually really good at that. I learned that from him. So there you go. We go paying it forward. Because I'm also a first-time manager. So a lot of these things that I'm learning, I just want, people to learn from my experience as well. So everybody watching, please, you can do everything. And so that's a great example. So, right, affirming strengths, right? So like public speaking, management, right? If Barbie is again, I'm going to use Barbie as an example now. If Barbie is good at community organizing and talking to people, meeting people with empathy, for me, it was a natural progression. Of course, then people want to listen to you and you'll be a good manager. That's sort of I think the same philosophy for me. Like, I'm a social worker, I'm doing casework, so naturally good at management, but I didn't think about it myself at first either. So I think getting that encouragement and affirmation is important. And then there's always partnerships, whether it's like the two of us partnering together, other organizations that we want to partner with. Like, I try never to position us as like we're the know-it-all, we're the one that has all the solutions. For us, it's like we have clear solutions. Here's our solutions. What have you got? And where can we work together? Maybe we don't work together on certain things because we don't agree, and that's okay. But building partnerships is a key part of community organizing. In job descriptions, it's important to be clear about what you're looking for. And I think a lot of language has changed around what we want. I encourage everybody to move away from qualifications and instead into desired skills, right? Qualifications has a very like strict sort of like class, I'm looking for the right word. It has a very status quo feel to it, where it's like very like professional. Oh, it's elitist. That's what I was trying to get at. It's an elitist way to look at you need to be qualified to work for us. If you're not good enough, then we don't want you. I think that dynamic starts off the relationship wrong for someone with lived experience, because like I said, they're already prone to thinking little of themselves and like minimize, like you're just like affirming their negative self-beliefs. So instead of using desired skills, right? Like, we want someone that's able to do this, right? Do presentations or talk to people or write some stuff, right? These are the things we want the person to do. And then it's up to the candidate to explain why they think they could do it, right? You know, I didn't go to college, but I have been in the community board for 10 years. And so I know the legislative process and I have written X, Y, Z, right? So there's a lot of ways that someone can show you their skills without sort of being able to say, oh, I have X amount of experience and I have X education, et cetera. I went to an Ivy League school, I'm, you know, all that stuff. And so, and also being clear about salary. I think salary negotiations are sort of this like taboo. We don't speak about this, right? And there's a lot of things that are changing that too, where like coworkers are being encouraged to share, you know, salary levels, and there should be equal pay for equal work, et cetera, et cetera. But in the hiring process, it's important to post what you want to pay for the position, right? Like, asking someone what they have made is not legal, but it also doesn't make them feel good, right? How do you know if you want the position if you don't even know how much you might make from it, right? And particularly with low-income people, this is something people don't think about. Is taking a higher paying job worth giving up the benefits I currently have, right? Let's say I'm a household of one and I'm on SNAP and I'm making, I don't know, $30,000 a year. Probably lower because the income guidelines. So I'm just throwing out numbers. But just to say, if I have let's say a housing subsidy, right? If I have a housing subsidy making whatever money, is it worth it for me to give that up to apply or take a job that I'm not even sure how much it's going to pay? Like, you see what I'm saying? So being clear up front of salary is important. Yes, please, Barbie, jump in.
I have a good example. So for those of you who don't know, I didn't mention it in the beginning or in my introduction, but I was featured in a documentary about hunger in America called A Place at the Table. And in the film, there was this exact moment. There was a moment where I was being interviewed. I had gone without a job. This was during the recession for a substantial amount of time. I was hired at the Coalition Against Hunger. So I was so happy to not only have a job that I didn't have for a long time, but to have a job doing something that I loved and that I knew was going to help people. What I didn't consider is because I was making more than the minimum wage, that in accepting that job, I lost my food stamps completely. I lost my child care subsidy, and I also lost the ability to be eligible for the reduced school meals and lunch program. So I was now paying my child care out of pocket. My children, while they were in daycare, were, I don't want to say the only ones, but one of the few that when they were handing out lunches to everyone, my kids got nothing, and had to sit there amongst those children and see that they were being treated differently because they weren't eligible for the program anymore. The amount of money that I was making put me $2 over the entire income limit. So just because of those $2, my food stamps were taken away, my childcare was taken away, and my children's lunch was taken away. So now I was making more money, but I have more expenses than what I originally had. And it was traumatizing for me to be working for an anti-hunger organization and still wasn't able to provide for my children in the ways that I have. And I was just so excited about, getting a new job and making more money than what I had made, and didn't consider the consequences of how that would have affected my life and my eligibility.
And unfortunately, that happens more than we would like. There's a lot of untold stories about benefits cliffs and sort of like the choices people have to make. And so salary negotiations and being upfront about that is one way that you can support people in making those decisions. So I'm looking at time. I hope you all enjoyed the presentation. We welcome your questions and encourage you to contact us. Like I said, we are trying to expand our reach to be more national. I think, we have a lot of benefits access services in New York City, but we also manage the National Hunger Hotline. So I'll drop that in the chat in case anybody anywhere needs assistance finding food resources. Our emails are on the screen if anybody would like to contact us and establish some sort of partnership, or just like an introductory meeting, right? Like, we'd love to hear from your community, what you're seeing, what resonated with you, what didn't. Maybe organizations that we should do this presentation for, right? Like, that you specifically want them to know better so they could benefit just from these clear sort of suggestions. And we do have a few minutes. So are there any questions about anything we talked about today while I look for this link?
I don't really have any questions, but I just wanted to say that both of you did a phenomenal job, and thank you so much. I was really in tune during your presentation.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that. Yeah, our style is very conversational. So you see it just flows very, because we want it to be engaging. We want it to be like easy to understand. So thank you for the feedback. And there is a feedback form in the chat. We appreciate it if everybody would fill that out at least, so we can keep improving. Anybody else want to say anything? We have a couple minutes.
Can I just add, you guys did a great job. I had to pop in now because we have multiple workshops going on. I want to participate in a few of them. You guys did a great job explaining how to sensibly work with people with lived experience. I just want to point out some of the concrete things we do with our food action boards. They lobby with us, come to meet with elected officials. Many of you know if elected officials have pictures of famous people on the wall, presidents and popes and prime ministers. One of our food action board members pointed up the wall and said, "I'm important, how come I'm not on your wall?" And that totally changed the tenor of the conversation. Our food action board members testify before elected bodies alongside me or Emilio. Sometimes whenever we have an event, whenever possible, we have food action board members speaking, and not just advocacy events, including our Ritziest fundraisers alongside Senator Schumer this year. And we arrange for people who want to from the food action board to speak to the media. I know some other groups have a rule that, well, none of our customers and clients, we don't want to exploit them by speaking to the media, and I get that. But if someone is, an adult and they're making an informed consent decision to speak out on their own behalf, they find them empowering. And so I think it's not just a good thing to do ethically and morally, but this is a concrete tool to advance our shared legislative and policy and economic agendas. Thank you. And thanks again, Barbie and Amelia, for a great job.
Thank you for, again, I mentioned some of those things, and thank you for reiterating the importance of the work we do with the food action boards. So I encourage you all to reach out to us. We have tons of volunteer opportunities, so would love to use anybody that's interested. And thank you for joining us today. I think that is the end of this session. So there is a food banking script in the chat that you can sign up for the next session. And so we thank you for your time and have a good Martin Luther King Day.